On today's More Than a Test, we have Shawn Bird, the Deputy Superintendent of both Academics and Leadership in San Antonio. What makes this conversation great, though, is not San Antonio. Shawn has been everywhere. LAUSD, Philadelphia, Houston, Portland, Oregon, which I didn't see coming. And he has been in leadership that entire time. He's seen everything. He's just humble and amazing. And it's a really great conversation about what's happening in San Antonio and Texas and across the country in education. Don't miss Shawn Bird on More Than a Test. Dr. Bird, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
It's the week after Labor Day, which means you've been in school now for 3 weeks?
Yep, this is beginning of week 4, yeah.
All right. Does it feel like things are rolling and feeling good, or how is it going in San Antonio?
Yeah, we've had a very good opening, smooth opening. We've gone through a lot in San Antonio with right sizing, so we closed 14 schools at the end of last year.
Oh,
so
wow.
We were a little nervous about how things were going to go, but actually we're doing really well. And so we had a good, smooth opening.
I wasn't aware you closed 14 schools. Elementary schools, middle schools, high schools?
They're all elementary because we have 100. We had over 100 schools for 45,000 kids, so we had way too much capacity in our buildings, and we needed to close those so we could serve our kids better. So it actually has worked out quite well.
We went through that here in Colorado, in Denver, and it actually ended up with a lot of protests. Parents were really upset. They wanted their kids to be able to walk to school, and even though the schools only had 100 kids in them, it just wasn't feasible for the district, and the parents really wanted it. Did you encounter any of that?
We did. We went through a lot of community meetings last year, so we wanted to really socialize this with our community. We had over 40 meetings with impacted communities, and it really was about it. Yes, it was too many buildings, and we did have some really small schools, but it's also just about equity and what we can offer our students. And in those really small buildings, you just can't offer a full range of services. So, we did. We had a lot of people that were very upset, but we spent a lot of time on the front end. Really, we called it blending our familia, so blending the two schools together. So last spring we did a lot of events with families, so they really had a smooth start to the year, and it's been really good.
And my understanding about your role as a deputy superintendent is you're over the leadership of all of those schools. It's something over 200 schools in San Antonio. So when those decisions happen, it's your decision, right?
I am over school leadership, so all the principals, and I'm also over the academic services department, so all of teaching and learning.
Oh, wow.
So it's a group decision though, led by our board. Our board of education is who passed the resolution to go through right sizing, and we executed on that resolution, and again to provide more opportunity for all of our kids, because we know that they can't thrive in really small schools, and now they can. They're bigger buildings.
What's something that you can't offer in a small school that you can when you consolidate?
Actually quite a lot of things. We want to provide mental health services to our kids, especially after COVID. And
Right.
You can't we just don't have the staffing to do that for one at every school, especially if there's 100 kids. So ends up happening is they end up sharing buildings. But we know that mental health crises don't always happen on Wednesday when the person is there. So same with special ed services. Those are hard services to provide on the full continuum when you have such a small school. And then also, like our instructional coaches, we want to be able to provide those in our buildings for our teachers, but we need to have enough staff there to be able to support that, because we're funded, in Texas, our funding is not great. So we have limited resources. So we have to stretch every dollar as far as we can, which is why we do this.
What does that mean? Your funding is not great in Texas?
Well, we get our basic allotment is $6,160 per student.
Wow.
Plus, then you have some federal entitlements and those kinds of things. So, average maybe $9,000. But if you think of a state on the East Coast where I used to work in Philadelphia, it was well over $20,000 per pupil. So, it's a big disadvantage when we have kids with a lot of needs that we need to be able to meet, particularly special students with special education needs. Those students are more expensive to educate, and we want to serve them well. So you can't really do that when you have a bunch of small buildings. So we need to have more economies of scale. So that was another reason for right sizing.
Just like emergencies don't happen on Wednesdays, kids with needs don't only just go to schools on the East Coast. So
yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. I'm a little surprised to hear that you're closing schools, because I have a good friend who works on the tourism board in San Antonio, and he would tell me that San Antonio is up and coming. It is the cool place to be. It's hip. I picture it being young. I haven't been in years. Is it true that San Antonio has changed quite a bit in the last few years?
It has, and it's actually one of the fastest growing cities in Texas. So we do. It is weird that we're closing schools when you have a fast growth city. However, people are just not having kids at the same as young as they used to, and they're not living in the urban core. So we have the school district we have two school districts that are in our suburbs that one of them has like around 100,000 students and the other one 68,000, and we're in the urban core and we have 45,000. So part of it is because of affordability in the city. It's just more expensive to raise children, and so people move out to the suburbs. And then part of it is the lower birth rate. Even those districts are experiencing declining enrollment because of the birth rate, and we don't anticipate that to change for a little while. Before lots of reasons. That's a nationwide problem, but urban schools in particular across the country, we're all dealing with declining enrollment.
Yeah, I'll say it's the same here. I live actually in Boulder, not in Denver anymore. And in Boulder, what we see is that kids are moving to Longmont, which is like the farm area. Like those schools are like gangbusters. Kids are just growing and they're building buildings. And then Boulder is shutting them down because our community is getting older and having fewer kids.
Yeah, yeah, and definitely we have an aging population in the city, but also just people that just are not having children as young as they used to, and they're not having as many children as they used to. So it's I have lots of friends that have just one or two kids. I come from a family of five kids. I don't think you see that very much anymore. It's just too expensive, I guess, these days.
So, something you said about your role surprised me. I think you saw it on my face was that you said you're over academic services and you're also over school leadership. In my opinion, as someone who's been a principal, right? School leadership is so operational. There are so many, they're like, every day is something different. Every day, there's a lot of things, challenges that come to a school that are not related to academics. Does it make sense for those two things to be under one person? Does it make your school leadership more academic? Tell me a little bit about your role specifically.
Yeah, so we did actually just change that. I was just over school leadership and HR actually last year, and then but my background is curriculum and instruction. My doctorate is actually in curriculum and instruction, and I've been a CAO before. In fact, the job before this, I was a CAO. So it does make sense to bring them together because we're really trying to focus on academics and improving outcomes for students. So we have I have a team of instructional superintendents who supervise directly the principals. I supervise those instructional superintendents, but it's nice that the academic team works closely with my team of instructional superintendents to really they can work really hand in hand to make sure the curriculum team says this is what should be happening in schools, this is what we want teachers to be working on, and then the instructional superintendents are working with the principals to make sure that's actually happening. And often if those are separate departments, they don't sometimes work well together and play nicely together. So it's good to have them under one deputy superintendent, because I just argue with myself. I don't have to argue with the other deputy superintendent about what's happening or not happening.
All right. When you think about your time, and I used to think about this a lot when I was a principal, is like how much of my time is going to kids, how much of my time is going to teachers. When you think about your split, how much of your time is going towards the leadership component, and how much is the academic component?
Yeah, I would say it's probably right now it's probably 60-40 towards leadership, but that's balancing out because again, I just took over the academics department. So and there's a strong team over there that is I empower my people to do their work, but I do spend a lot of time in schools. So working with principals and working with my instructional superintendents to make sure that kids are getting what they need in schools every day. So I like to spend at least part of every day in schools, visiting schools.
Oh, wow. You make it to a classroom every day.
Uh, Not every day, but I try to do it. I mean, at least 4 days a week I'm in schools. Fridays is pretty hard because I have my meetings on Fridays.
Wow. That's bold in two ways. Like, one, trying to get out to a school is hard when you have meetings and calendars and things like that. But then also to have your meetings on Fridays when what you want to do is get out of the building is pretty great. So it sounds like you're prioritizing your schools first. I read the most fun thing about preparing for this interview was looking at all the places you've been. You've already mentioned Philadelphia and Houston, and we'll go through that in a little bit. What makes San Antonio special?
Well, San Antonio is a great size district. It's only 45,000 kids, so you can really see the impact of your work here. And I've worked in really large districts, and so that's nice. It's also really a bonus for me because the superintendent here, his name is Jaime Aquino, and he actually hired me for my first central office job in Los Angeles 13 years ago. So to get to work with him again, he was deputy superintendent in LA. So to get to work with him again is a real bonus. And I was so happy when he came to Texas and this opportunity came about to get to. Been a mentor of mine for many years, and I'm glad we get to work together again.
What's the best piece of advice he's ever given you?
I think that's a good question. Best piece of advice is lead with your heart. He is a person who definitely leads with his heart first, and he's a rare superintendent because he knows a lot about instruction and he's in schools. In fact, he's visited this year 45 schools. I'm only at like 31 right now, but some of mine have been multiple visits. So I think that counts. But so he is out in schools just as much as, if not more, than I am, and he's just a great role model for our principals, and he just cares a lot about what happens for children, for all children, and that's why I enjoy working with him. And I've worked for some amazing superintendents too, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and you just threw in another district. So now we've got Houston, Philadelphia, LA,
Yeah.
San Antonio. Okay, what's a challenge that is unique to San Antonio?
Here, it really has been since I've been here, because we were right sizing. So I came to the district when that process was starting, and it was hard because I didn't know the city that well. So it's hard to be a senior leader and going through something that's pretty painful for the community. And I didn't have the people didn't know me. People didn't know, who is this guy coming from Houston who's now standing in front of us telling us our school's going to close. So that was really challenging. But yeah, I think that's probably the most challenging thing about this district. But now that I've been here a year, things are smoothing out now, and we're moving along.
Okay, I'm sure that parents pleaded with you, right? They wanted their schools to stay open. Did anyone say anything that almost changed your mind?
We actually did. We had 20 schools on our list to close, and we only closed 14. So we did go out and listen to our community, and yes, people did make compelling arguments about why their school shouldn't close. And I mean, every neighborhood, um, it's disruptive. The school is often the heart of a community, so you don't ever want to do that. We have a lot of people here that went to school in these schools, and now their kids are going, or their grandkids even. We hear from grandparents, quite honestly, that I went to school here. So you have a lot of those personal stories, but we had to have something compelling that, besides just the personal story. So it had to be something that was really going to make an adverse impact on children. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We let some of our small schools stay open. We have two single gender schools. We have a boys' school and a girls' school. So obviously those are small, but we couldn't, and they met our criteria for closure in terms of the number of students. But that there was a unique program there, so we let those stay open. We originally wanted to close any school under 450 kids, but we heard from the community that they value smaller schools, so we actually lowered our threshold to 350. So we still have a number of small schools in the district, but so those are the kinds of things that we listened to, and took some schools off the closure list when they didn't meet that criteria. And we listened to our community. We first told them, like, this is what's going to happen. This is why we need to do this. Then we published the list of schools that we recommended to our board for closure. And then we went to each of those communities to have meetings. We gathered their feedback, and then we went back to the board and said, okay, we're going to remove these schools from closure.
It sounds like a long first year for you.
It was a very long first year.
Okay, let me ask you one more question about leadership, then I'm going to ask a little bit about academics. What is the one message that you really give your principals at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, I give my principals the message that kids only have one shot at third grade, fourth grade, whatever grade they're in. They have 1 year, and we owe it to our kids. And we want to make this the best place to work for adults, but not at the expense of what children need. So we have to really hold high expectations for adults, and also make it a great place to work. But the most important thing we do is serve children, and we have to keep that at the forefront of everything that we do.
I love what you just said. My husband's from Wyoming. He grew up in Wyoming. I grew up abroad at an international school. And one of the things he noticed about my experience was that every year of school, I have some like really tangible, meaningful experience that I had with that teacher, with that class, a field trip, a moment, a something. And he's like, I don't have that for every year, Laura. So I think what you're saying about like, this is your shot for them to say someday, my third grade teacher changed my life, or this field trip is why I went to college here. And I think we underestimate that. So I think that's a really good message. All right, let's talk about the academics. What's the biggest academic challenge you're facing right now in San Antonio?
Yeah, we have a lot of kids that are reading below grade level, and are not performing at grade level. And COVID really exacerbated some of that. So I know that's not a problem just in San Antonio, but we have to serve the students that we have in front of us, and we have to accelerate their learning to give them the opportunity that they want. We have an expression around here that we want to prepare kids to live a life without boundaries, and of limitless possibility. And so to do that, we have to make sure that we're providing high quality instruction every day. And so I think the challenges around that are, people are not going to school to be teachers as much as they used to. So the workforce is really challenging to recruit teachers. So we talk a lot about, we got to retain who we have, and treat them well and train them well, and so make them want to stay here. So I think the the workforce challenges are pretty severe, especially when you're trying to accelerate learning for kids. And so we're hiring teachers that are not necessarily fully certified. And that's a thing you can do in the state of Texas through alternative certification. And they're often very good teachers. It's not a knock on them. It's just they don't have the skills necessary from day one to really be able to help accelerate learning. So that's a real challenge to get them up to speed and to give them the support that they need so they can be the most effective in the classroom.
Yeah. My mom was a teacher for 40 years. And what she used to tell people all the time was like, I don't think my energy slowed down that much in 40 years, but man, did I get smarter and smarter about kids. Like there was no data point I hadn't seen. By the time my last class came in, I could see every issue and know how to fix it all. And I think that's often underappreciated that even I remember in Texas, you used to drive through and see the billboards that said, want to teach, when can you start?
That's
Right.
right. That's right. And I always tell people when I was a teacher, I was a high school teacher, and first period, sometimes it wasn't so great, but by fifth period, I was good. I was really good. So we have to try to remove the variability of that for our teachers.
I have to tell you, I was at a private school here in Denver that has a rotating schedule. So what you have for first period changes every day. Like,
Oh,
it goes
yeah,
up and down. And I asked why. And I thought they were going to say it's because, some kids aren't as great in the morning. So for them to take math first period every day is a detriment. But the principal actually said, she's like, my teachers, I don't want my kids to always have the same teacher first thing in the morning because they
yeah,
change throughout the day. And
that's
so
right. That's
it's really,
smart. Yeah, we should
really
take that.
hard to staff, though. Incredibly
Yeah,
difficult to staff.
yeah,
Interesting. Okay. So you were talking before about how you were a CAO in Houston right before this, right?
well, yeah.
When were you in Houston exactly?
I was there 2020, 2021 until 2023. Was there 2 years?
It's a really interesting time to be in Houston because that's
Yes,
around the time the state took over, correct?
it is. I was there for about a year before the state decided to take over Houston, which was an interesting process. Actually, all of it, and none of us on the administrative team were there when the problems existed that caused the takeover. Those problems existed back in 2019 with one of our high schools that had actually come out of it was an accountability issue. The school was a multiple year failing school, and it had come out. It was a C-rated school by the time the state took us over, but there was lawsuits involved. So the problem had been fixed, but the state didn't see it that way, so the state took over.
That's so interesting. I actually taught in Houston, and I was an assistant. I was an assistant principal. My first assistant principal was in the Heights in Houston at Hogg Middle School. That we turned around too. So I have some idea of what turnaround is like in Houston.
And Hogg
Uh,
is a great school these days.
I
A
when
great school.
when I walked in, we were one of the lowest for school choice. Most people don't know in Houston, you can basically choose through a lottery system to go anywhere and you will get bused to that place, to that school. And when I left, we were the number 3 most chosen school in Houston. It's a really great little place. But so tell me this though, what was that experience like having, if you know what it was like before, and then you got to see a little bit at least of the after, what was that experience like?
Yeah, I would say it was very jarring because I mean it was the again we didn't have the problem had been fixed with that school that was multiple year underperforming. So I understand. I agree that schools, if they're multiple year underperforming, something has to be done. But I think that there were definitely politics involved in that decision because the board of education in Houston had sued the state, which kept it kind of at bay for several years. So the takeover was rather delayed. So it was very confusing to people in Houston. It was confusing to the community in Houston. They didn't understand really, why this was happening because the problem was fixed. It was Houston has had severe turnover. I just read in the article in the paper the other day, almost 10,000 people, employees have left that district since the state takeover. So it was very jarring, obviously, to people. They had 4,000 people resigned in 1 month. So, clearly there's a lot of turmoil, and that's just not good for children because when you have that kind of shock to the system, that is it's troubling. I do think, however, I do think that there are some positive things that are coming from the takeover. They did have an improvement in academic achievement at a group of schools that they really focused on, and I think that's great. That's what all I want is for kids to get what they need and for them to have successful experience in school. Unfortunately, sometimes politics does play a part in that, and that is unfortunate because the people that get hurt are kids. We're all big people. I always tell people we're living the dream already. We have our college degree, we have our job, We can always get other jobs, but it's the kids that are going to suffer through that turmoil with staff turnover and all the changes that are made. So
Okay, let me ask you two questions. So we started this conversation talking about you going to all of your schools that you're shutting down in San Antonio, and this like cycle that you had to go through with feedback and making sure you listen to everyone. And then you kind of described the state takeover as almost the exact opposite. It was like, we're showing up, we got our boxes, we're in, you're out. That's the way it goes. Is that true? Is that if in that situation, it kind of felt more like when you say jarring, that's what you're describing?
yeah, because we found out in March is when it was actually spring break. We were on spring break when we learned that the Supreme Court had ruled that they could proceed with the takeover. uh, we came back from spring break, and the state took over June 1st, so we had very little time. They did do a couple of community meetings. The state came and did some community meetings. It wasn't really to get feedback, it was just to tell them that this is happening. And then then the commissioner appointed a new superintendent, and they were off to the races June 1st. So it was a very fast process from when the public knew about it till it actually happened. I mean, we knew, of course, that it was a possibility. We knew there was an active court case, but I don't think anybody really thought that it was going to go there. I certainly didn't think it was going to go there, but it did.
Wow, interesting. It's interesting to listen to you talk about this because I think a lot of times superintendents have kind of one experience. They've been in the same place for 20. They taught there, they were principal there, and then they're a superintendent there. But your experience is the exact opposite. You have been a CAO, a deputy superintendent, a head of all kinds of things all over the place. Before Houston, it was Philadelphia. Am I right?
No, so I started my career in Houston. I was a teacher in Houston, in the Houston area. Spring Branch ISD and then I finished my doctorate, and I always wanted to live in California, so I moved to LA. I lived in California, worked for LA Unify, where I was a principal supervisor. So I had been a principal, then I was a principal supervisor. Um, and then I had an opportunity to go to Philadelphia to be chief of schools, which is over school leadership. And so I did that. I'd never lived on the East Coast, and I thought, well, that'd be fun. I love history, so Philly would be a fun place to live. So I did that. And then the superintendent in Portland, Oregon, Guadalupe Guerrero, I knew him from other professional experiences. So I went to be his chief of schools and later deputy superintendent. Um, so and then went back to Texas. I never really thought I would come back to Texas. I had enjoyed my travels, especially on the West Coast, and thought I would probably end up back in California and just stay there and retire. But I had a chance to come back to Texas when Millard House became superintendent of Houston, so I went there. But all of my movement has been around. I knew somebody, or I was recruited to go someplace. So it's always been a great, and that's why I say I've worked for a lot of great people. I've worked for a lot of great superintendents, and I've learned a lot. And it's been fun traveling the country. But that I'm here to stay in San Antonio. Hopefully, is the probably my final stop. Maybe one more stop for superintendency, but it's been fun, and I've been lucky. I've worked in all kind of the biggest urban school districts in the country, so I've learned so much, and have been able to bring those lessons. And they're all very different places. Those are all, but they do have some. I would tell people that the cast of characters changes, but the problems and the behaviors do not. So there's a lot, very similar issues in urban schools across our country, and I've been fortunate to have these jobs where I've been in a senior leadership role in these districts.
Um, if you could be a superintendent anywhere, where would you go?
Well, I really hope when Jaime retires that I'll be a superintendent right here in San Antonio. I really love this community, and but I I want to be a superintendent at the right place. I don't want to be a superintendent just to be one. It's got to be the right with the right fit and the right place. So, there's definitely school districts that another place I would love to go is where I went to school in Houston, in the Houston area. That district, if that ever opened up, I would be tempted to apply there because that district, made me who I am today. I always tell people that I know what a high quality public school education is because I got one, and I would never really be where I am without that. And so to go back and lead in your district that you graduate from, that would I always think that would be such a cool thing to way to end my career, kind of full circle. But
It's nice
yeah,
for Texas to have you back.
it's got to be the right place and the right situation.
Okay, let me ask you this. So you kept saying, you were a supervisor of principals. And I feel like I got to chill up my spine because, and I know this about myself, that when I was a teacher, I looked at the principal and was like, I could do that. And I have definitely been the principal who looked at the superintendent and thought, I could do that, and maybe even I could do that better. Right. And I think it's true that principals are often really dynamic leaders. They are often working insane. I mean, the one thing I say I don't want to ever do is high school principal because of all the events they do. I mean, they're at a football game, a school dance, a ballet show, a play every night of the week. And I'm like, and it's never enough. Um, I'm just curious, how do you supervise leaders who are probably pretty good at their job, but also kind of like overworked and probably looking at you thinking like you've got the easier role?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I was a principal myself, and I was a middle school and high school principal, so they do work lots of hours. I think really, I yes, they're called principal supervisors, but we really look at it as support. We look at it as being their partner, helping them think through problems. As a former principal, it can be a pretty lonely job, and you had a lot of people depending on you, and lots of problem principals are just problem solving all day long. So sometimes it's helpful really to have a coach or problem or thought partner to help you. The supervision part is really, fortunately we don't have many that we have to supervise, and but sometimes that happens. But it's really about just helping them think through the unique context of their school and help them get better at supervising teachers, because principals, that we all have different skills, and some of them are really strong instructional people, others are not, and so we try to help them grow in the area that they need growth in. So I really, we really call them, it's a fine line between coaching and supervision, and I think my team serves as both of those roles.
Are you seeing the turnover in school leadership that you are in classroom roles?
No, not here, not in this district. I think assistant principals, they turn over quicker, but that's because they're usually going to become principals. In San Antonio, we actually have quite a number of principals who have been with us for a long time, and have been in the same school for a long time.
Do you have any wild or unbelievable school leadership stories?
uh, Not off the top of my head. I mean, the principals, I think, are the most amazing people, because they set the conditions for teachers to do their work, and so it's like, principal, it has been, of all my jobs, it's been my favorite one, because you really are the kind of the little mayor of your little of your school and your community, and it's such a fun job. But no, I don't have any wild. I mean, I've been fortunate. I work with really good, strong principals that are here for the right reasons.
The one I usually tell, I have quite a few. I have some wild ones, but one of the ones that was my favorite was when I was at Hog, which we talked about. We had a lot of principal turnover, and I was just an assistant principal. And like the second one came in, and we were on the walkie talkies, and someone was like, "Oh, they're in the pool." No one knew we had a pool. We had a pool in the basement. We had a whole school of people who didn't know we had. So we cleaned up the pool and we added swimming classes. But it was like
All
this
right.
unknown, like, and there was like all these
Yeah.
like crazy things from like the '80s down there. It was crazy. So
Yeah. I
we
didn't
gotta.
know Hog had a pool either. I
And
didn't know that either. Yeah.
next time you go, check it out.
Yes,
And
I
the base
will, yeah.
and when I was there, we also built squash courts on the top floor.
That is the
So
unique thing about that school to me, is they have squash courts. Yeah.
yeah, I was there for that. That was a
Yeah.
whole different mess. All right.
Yeah.
So tell me this. You have been through a lot of the biggest districts. You have followed great people, and you've done a lot of great things in academics. What are you most worried about in schools right now? And this is like nationwide. And what are you most excited about?
Yeah, I am. I'm most worried about the political polarization in this country that has rippled and has gone into schools. We see this the reason people don't want to become teachers, quite honestly, is just look at the news and look at the attacks on public education every day. That is really troubling to me, and I think it's just so unnecessary, because public schools are really the backbone of this country. And most people in leadership in our went through public school at some point in their life, in our government leadership. So to see them being attacked all the time is really troubling, and to see teachers being attacked for just taking care of kids and trying to teach them how to read and write. I think there's just a lot of misinformation in society about what we do in schools, and so that's definitely troubling. The thing I'm positive, or more excited about, is I think that we finally have like turned the corner from COVID, and things are starting to be normal again. Not that everything was great when it was back in the good old days, because some of it needed to change, because we weren't serving all kids. But I do think like the routines of we it was hard to get kids back into school, and I still think we're still struggling with where did all these kids go. But but I think that this last year and this year seem to be more normal and more get kids are getting back into the routine of being in school, and school is so important for them to just to socialize and to learn how to exist in society. There's so many things I think that people take for granted that we do in public schools that have been missing, and we have this group of kids that were at home part of the time, and then they has really interrupted a lot of things in their social development, and but I do think we're starting to turn the corner on that.
The amount that I hear from superintendents about attendance and just like the routine of school and how hard it is to change. I spoke with the Spokane superintendent, and one of the things that they did was they like created they worked with an organization to get basketball available to every kid. That basically, like, you didn't matter how bad you are, if you want to play basketball, there was going to be a program at your school. And he was like, you would not believe the amount of kids that came to school to go play basketball, right? It's just and the schools are just getting so creative because the systems are gone, right? The you get on the bus is just what you do is gone. And so how do we like entice them? How do we drag them back?
Yeah, yeah, and I think one of the things we learned from COVID is that we do need to do things differently to meet the needs of all kids. And so I think there were some. I mean, I wouldn't say positive, but there were some lessons we learned from COVID that can help transform education for the better. And hopefully, we're starting to see some differences with that. But I do think that there was in Texas it wasn't so bad because Texas opened up sooner than other places. But I was on the West Coast when at the really deep parts of COVID where we closed schools in Portland for. I mean, they didn't reopen for more than a year. So I mean that's a long time for a kid to be out of school and out of their routine, because kids need more than anything humans, but kids need routines, and they just didn't exist, which caused a lot of side effects.
If everyone missed it on your bingo card, you can now check off Portland as another district that you've
That's right.
worked
Portland,
in.
Oregon. Yes, that's right.
That's incredible. Okay, what makes when you think about I know you said like the characters change, but everything's about the same. What's one thing that makes every district similar, and what's one thing that like just doesn't transfer between districts?
I mean, I think there's so many similarities between districts. In urban districts, it's really dealing with kind of the poverty that exists in urban cores, and that takes a special skill set and a special kind of teacher to. You have to really know that if you sign up to work in an urban school setting, then you're gonna work really hard, and you're gonna have to generally bring kids that are far below grade level up to grade level. And so it's our expectation that kids are not just getting 1 year of growth; they actually need to get 1.5 years of growth to be able to catch up at some point. So I think that's the commonality in urban school districts. And then what is always different is just the context of the city. And whenever I've gone to someplace new, the first thing I hear about is like, well, no, you don't understand this community. It's different than that community. Which, I mean, they are of course different, but it is kind of funny to me because I'm like, well, yeah, but there's a lot of very similar things that are happening and that are happening in all of our cities across the country. But so I think there's just so many more similarities and differences in all these places that I've worked. But poverty, I would say, is the big one.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think often, like when we think about these urban settings, we think about, just cities and crimes and like whatever. But really and truly, when I worked, the difference between Denver public schools and Boulder Valley schools is I was really in Denver dealing with a lot of kids who were homeless in my schools. And that's a very big difference in what you experience out in a wealthier area like Boulder. What I'm surprised by, considering the urban areas you've lived in and how hard I know those districts are, is that you have all your hair and it doesn't seem like you have a ton of stress lines. And besides like the face cream, like how do you manage the stress to keep wanting to do urban districts? Because I don't think everyone has that
Yeah,
in
no,
them.
it is not for the faint of heart. It is not. It's definitely a calling, and it's definitely something you have to love. And I love every minute of it. This is my 27th year, and there's never. Well, there was a during COVID, it was a little more challenging. But besides COVID, honestly, I can say I've never wake up and don't want to go to work. I love what I do, and I think it's kids that keep you young, and it's just being in the environment of the fast paced environment of urban schools that is really it's really invigorating and inspiring. I mean, uh, you meet. I mean, everywhere I've been, you just meet the most incredible young people, and just talking to them about their hopes and dreams for what they want for tomorrow, and being some small part of that is what keeps us all coming to work every day.
What's something you've heard from a student recently that inspired you?
I was actually at our ag farm, agriculture farm at.
You have an ag farm?
We do. I was there because they had the pigs had just had babies, so I wanted to go see the little piglets. And then when I was there, actually a goat was born. That was awesome. Well, I mean, I didn't see it actually happen, but it had just happened. But anyway, I met a young man over there, and I was asking. He's a senior, and I was asking him like, what drew you to this program? And he was actually he's in the ag sciences program, and he's also in the horticulture program, which is like two different things, and he's going to go to school to be for cybersecurity. So I'm like, okay, well, but he's in the ag program really, so he can hopefully get a scholarship and help make his transition to college easier. But he was just like this most intelligent kid, and he was telling me all about what he was learning and why he was so excited about. He just bought a pig the day before to raise, so he can like take it to the rodeo or whatever they do and sell it. And so I mean, I meet kids like that all the time that just have. They're just interesting and they're. I love the curiosity of kids, especially high school kids. I was a high school teacher, so I love like juniors and seniors because that's who I taught. And I think they're it's such an interesting time in their life, and just to watch them going into adulthood and just the curiosity that they still have, sometimes like childlike curiosity, and then also just seeing their hopes for the future. And graduation is my favorite time of year. I shake every kid's hand that graduates from our schools and send them off on their way, and it's just always inspiring to get to be around them.
I don't get to spend much time with kids anymore unless I'm doing like some of our R&D testing at Amira. And I will say, I cannot remember the last time I had talked to an adult who had like three very different interests, right? Like adults are like one lane. I am on this road. This is where I drive. And then you've got a kid being like, well, ag, horticulture, and cybersecurity. That is really inspiring and like makes my life a little lighter.
And he did tell me cybersecurity says he said, I know I can make a lot of money doing that. So yeah, that's smart. You can.
Well, I'm like getting to like believe that, that there's where this path that you're going to take will, get you to what you want in life, I think is really valuable and interesting as well. That's really great. So thinking about, I'm going to ask you one more question. So the one thing that we haven't hit on is technology. And I read an article recently that said, 80% of teachers plan to use AI in their classrooms this upcoming year. We've been talking about ag, and you've seen all districts take all kinds of transformation. How are you feeling about technology this year?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel really curious about AI. I do think it's a tool that is going to really help our teachers do their jobs better. And I think we cannot, when it first became a thing, people first started talking about it, like, oh, we should have a policy against it. That's like shutting down the internet. It's not going to happen, right? So we have to figure out how to deal with it. But I do think that now that we actually have a task force in the district made up of teachers and other stakeholders that are trying to find out what are the productive ways that we can use AI and teach kids about AI that are going to help them. Because the truth is, AI has been around. If you have Siri or Alexa or whoever, that's all artificial intelligence. And so I think I think it's a really exciting time. It's something that we can innovate in education around, and just doing it in a responsible way. And I think for teachers, I mean, I was an English teacher. I would have loved to have had machine grading help me like give feedback to students on their writing. And I mean, I used to teach 175 kids a day, so grading all those papers was ridiculous. So now I think for teachers, like helping them with their lesson plans, helping them with that kind of stuff that can save them time, because we know that teachers they're just so overwhelmed all the time, and so this is a tool that can really help them. So I'm excited for that as well.
This whole entire time, I thought you had been a history teacher, not an English teacher, because
Nope,
you said you
English.
were.
I
And so,
love history. I love history, but
all
English
right,
is my
let me ask you two random questions. First of all, do you have a favorite history fact?
favorite history fact. No favorite fact. I love a very narrow. I love like presidential like history. I love to read presidential biographies. I love like that kind of, and I love biographies of all kinds really. But like I love reading about our presidents. I love reading about the Supreme Court justices. I've read all the ones that have biographies out. I've read about them. So I mean, I just think it's just cool to think that this country is so young, and it's just I just think it's fascinating all the things that we think now we think, oh my god, it's never been worse, but if you actually look back in history, it actually has been much worse. If you've seen Hamilton, you know that it actually was much worse before. And political violence has always been a thing in this country. That's not new. So I think that's why I enjoy history. Just
Yeah, it makes you
it
feel like,
gives you perspective.
yeah, for sure. I met Doris Kearns Goodwin this year, and
Oh my god, she's amazing.
and 82, and I'm sorry, but smarter than you and I combined. Still sharper than you and I combined. But it was so fun to listen to her relive the LBJ days and some of the other research that she's done. So I'm a big presidential buff too. So at some point we could talk about that. Is there a book that you love to teach though as an English teacher? Now that I know the secret.
Oh, English is my favorite book. I had two: The Great Gatsby and The Scarlet Letter. I love those two books. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's incredible. Okay, before we go to our rapid fire, we hit Portland, LAUSD, Philadelphia, Houston, and San Antonio, and Pasadena. I heard Pasadena in there.
I was a CAO in Pasadena. Yeah.
Are there any other districts that I'm missing?
Well, I was a teacher and principal in Spring Branch and early in my career.
Outside of Houston, that's right. Okay, I got close though to getting them all. All right. Well,
it's not because I can't hold a job. It's never been for that reason.
No, it's because people love working with you and they invite you where they go, which I think is beautiful and wonderful. But I think you do win the bingo for the most districts mentioned in one podcast. So thank you for that. But with our time left, I'm going to ask you our 5 rapid fire questions that we ask every guest, even if they haven't been to as many districts as you have. And the first one is the podcast is called More Than a Test. And at Amira, we have a reason for that, but everyone thinks of something different when they hear it. So when you heard More Than a Test, what did you think of?
I think of our kids and their life is more than a test, and we should measure their success in different ways other than standardized testing.
That's lovely. Okay, a lit moment. And what I mean by that is a moment of you and a book that is either your happy place or changed your life or is something you think about often.
I think it's not one particular book. I think about when I was a kid, though, and really fell in love with reading. And I would, in the summer, we would go, a friend of mine had a lake house. We would go to that, and sometimes it would be raining outside, and I would just sit and read books. And I read a lot of books that summer, and I just fell in love with the reading, which is why I think it's so important for kids to find joy in reading, not just the task of reading. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. A piece of technology you love?
Well, I do love my my iPhone.
All right.
In my pocket.
So you can take pictures of the pigs when they're born.
I have pictures of the pigs on here. I do. And the goats too.
Awesome. The best advice you've ever been given?
Follow your dreams and don't ever let anybody tell you can't do it.
And one book you think everyone should read?
Oh, Radical Candor by Kim Scott, especially for leadership. I love
that
book.
Where do you fall? I have a problem with ruinous empathy is why I ask.
Yeah, that is sadly sometimes I'm too empathetic sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I want everything to be my fault and I want to fix it for sure.
Right. Well, my team calls me a fixer, and that's not a good thing. Sometimes you don't want to do that. But I love that. Yeah.
I love that book too. Thanks for bringing it up. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for your service to so many districts and so many kids. And thanks for spending some time with me today. Thanks for joining us on the More Than a Test podcast. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. At Amira Learning, we believe every child deserves a chance to become a reader, and we're excited to be part of this conversation. See you next week, and thanks for joining.